So we're here today at Mallows Bay because we are going to be banding osprey chicks. So ospreys are sometimes also called fishhawks or seahawks if you've ever heard of that football team. Those are all the same kind of bird, and they are a raptor. They're a top predator here in the Chesapeake Bay region, and they eat fish. That is all they eat, so you often find them on rivers and creeks and bodies of water like that. Ospreys are a good sentinel species, which means they help indicate the health of the surrounding environment because they are impacted so much by their environment, whether it's the quantity and quality of fish that they can catch in the river or the amount of pollution in an area. Ospreys tend to be kind of collectors of things, so if there's a lot of trash in the area, their nests tend to be a little trashy. So you can really learn a lot about the health and the surrounding environment just by how ospreys are doing with their populations and their nest building and things like that. So bird banding in general helps to provide data regarding the ages, the migration, the distribution, breeding site fidelity, which means whether they come back to the same spot over and over again. The bird banding lab, which is run by the United States Geological Survey, supports all of the bird banding. So that's who issues out the bands that have unique identifying numbers. And then they manage all the information. So if you were to see a bird that has a band on it with a number, if you report that to the banding lab, they can tell you where and when that was banded. And then they will tell the person who banded it. And that's how the scientists kind of share the information. So when we go out here in a little bit to band the osprey, all we're going to be doing, we will pull up to the nest. We try to be as quick as possible because it is summer in southern Maryland and we like to keep the birds as low stress and as low heat, so we try and go quick so that they can get back on the nest and stay cool. But we will go out there, we will remove the chicks from the nest. They will each get fitted with a little metal ankle bracelet that has a unique identifying number. That gets squeezed on with a pair of pliers so that we can make sure that it stays on, and we make sure that it is small enough and tight enough that it won't slide down over their foot and impact their ability to catch prey. We also are super mindful of their blood feathers. When babies are growing in their feathers, that first set of feathers is with them for a long time. So if we were to accidentally knock out a feather, that's impacting them for a long time. So again, that just goes to safe handling. And after they have been fitted and the numbers have been recorded, we return them to their nest, and Ken, the bird bander, will then report the data to the banding lab so that if they ever find those birds in the future, he can gather more information about them. So the biggest challenges, I would say, are nest access. There are a lot of nests here in Mallows Bay, but in order to be able to band ospreys, you have to be able to safely access the nest. So there are a lot of them that just aren't conducive for that. No one is supposed to climb on the ships here in Mallows Bay, so that makes the ones on the Accomack inaccessible. Some of them are in trees, which also makes it less accessible. Trees on the water aren't really conducive for ladders. So that's a big impact. Weather also matters. We have a small window where the ospreys are the right size to safely band. And we also, when we're taking a boat out, have to keep in mind wind and temperatures and things like that. And then entanglements, like I mentioned, this pollution and those kind of things in the nest has a big impact on our ability to do things if things are tangled up. The partnership between Ken, who's our bander, and myself we started banding ospreys at Smallwood State Park in 2016, I believe. And one of the cool stories from that particular nest site that we had been monitoring was a bird that we called Z07. She had a special identifying band on her leg that was blue from a project in Ohio. And once that was reported to the banding lab, we could trace her all the way back to northern Ohio, which is really unique. Usually ospreys are migratory, so they do fly south at the end of the summer and come back the next year. But usually they come back to the same region. So it was kind of interesting to have one that had ended up at Smallwood State Park from all the way in northern Ohio. Typical lifespan for an osprey is about 10 years, and we had her at Smallwood until she was at least 13. So that was kind of a fun one to be able to track that one through a wildlife biologist who had banded her in 2007 in Ohio. Banding helps us to gather more information about populations of ospreys. There have been studies in different parts of the Chesapeake Bay region where they went out to monitor the nest sites and do the banding and saw big changes in the population density and the productivity And so when they see things like that, then that leads you, like I said, they're a sentinel species. So if something is changing with your population of ospreys, that's your sign to start seeing what is changing in the rest of the ecosystem. So whether it's the food source or whether it's something to do with nesting sites or things like that, there's a lot of studies still going on to determine what was the case in that instance. But that is what makes it important, is it helps us to then know that things are changing and be able to be more mindful of the changes to our ecosystem. So I think the biggest thing is just to be conscious of your litter. Litter impacts all of our wildlife, but especially with raptors that use those talons for everything they do. Fishing line is horrible. Be mindful when you're fishing to not get it stuck in the tree, because when an osprey goes down to grab a branch for its nest, it's going to take whatever you cut loose and left behind. So being mindful of your litter. Platforms are always helpful if you live on the water. There are lots of really easy to build platform templates that you can find on various Department of Natural Resources websites. And you can put a platform out that gives them a nesting habitat, that gives them a space to do it safely, versus sometimes they'll pick precarious things like power poles, and then that doesn't end well for your electricity or the osprey. And then if you see a band on a bird, if you're a photographer, you like to do wildlife photography, and you happen to see a banded bird, please report those numbers. The only way that we are able to gather that data that we so desperately want is by people like you guys reporting the information to the banding lab, and then the banding lab shares all of that information with everybody involved. And then just being aware of your environment, being respectful of observing from a safe distance. If you're close enough that you're making the bird show negative behavior, whether it's flying away or things like that, you're probably too close. So those are definitely some ways. You can also support wildlife rehabilitators. Anytime we have problems that are not handleable by just cutting line off of an osprey's foot or something like that, we rely on those more experienced people, and so supporting programs like that is also super helpful. If you have enjoyed checking out the osprey and learning a little bit more about them today, you can also watch the live stream cam that's on the nest at Smallwood State Park by going to the Smallwood State Park website.